A struggling single dad helps a poor tourist girl, thinking she has nowhere else to go. But what he doesn't know? She's actually a secret billionaire, running from a life where love is just another transaction. As she bonds with him and his daughter, she starts to feel something real, something she's never had before. But when her true identity is exposed, his world shatters, believing she was only playing with their hearts. Will he walk away from what they built, or will he fight for the love neither of them saw coming? Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. And if you're enjoying these stories, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow's special episode is one you definitely don't want to miss. Logan Barrett squinted at the column of numbers in his ledger, the red ink a glaring reminder of his precarious finances. The early morning sunlight streamed through the cafe windows, highlighting the worn but meticulously clean surfaces of Shoreline Cafe. He rubbed his tired eyes and took another sip of coffee, strong and black, the kind that kept him going through days that started at dawn and often ended well past midnight. 5 more cancellations this month, he muttered to himself, closing the book with more force than necessary. The Winterstone Development Corporation's announcement of potential land acquisitions in the area had already scared off regular customers who feared price hikes. Logan's jaw tightened. Rich people and their corporations always thought they could buy happiness, or in this case, a charming coastal town, without considering the lives they disrupted. "Dad, have you seen my tide chart?" Aya's voice broke through his thoughts as she bounded down the stairs, her ponytail bouncing with each step. Despite being only 10, she carried a notebook nearly half her size, filled with careful observations of the local marine ecosystem. Logan's expression softened immediately. "Check the drawer by the sink, sweetheart. Isn't it a bit early for tide pool exploration?" "Science fair, Dad." Aya rolled her eyes with the exaggerated patience only a child could muster. "I told you 3 times yesterday. I'm tracking the anemone populations before and after the storm." Right. Logan nodded, amazed as always by his daughter's scientific mind. "Just be back before the rain starts, okay? They're predicting a big one." "Promise." She planted a quick kiss on his cheek, grabbed an apple from the counter, and headed for the door, her t-shirt emblazoned with a cartoon octopus that matched the cafe's coastal theme. "Aya," Logan called after her. "I love you." "Love you too, Dad," she called back without turning, already focused on her mission. Logan watched her go, his chest tight with pride and the familiar ache of wishing her mother could see the remarkable person their daughter was becoming. 5 years since cancer had taken Sarah, and still, some mornings, the grief felt fresh. He pushed himself up from the desk. No time for dwelling on the past, not with a cafe to open and bills to pay. Across town, Elena Winterstone adjusted her well-worn backpack, carefully chosen to complete her disguise. The simple cotton dress and minimal makeup were a far cry from the designer clothes and perfect styling expected of the Winterstone Hotel heiress. She tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, feeling both nervous and exhilarated by her deception. 3 months of freedom. That's all she needed. 3 months away from her grandmother's suffocating control and the parade of potential husbands interested only in her fortune. 3 months to scout this charming coastal location on her own terms, to prove she could make sound business decisions without sacrificing the environmental values her parents had instilled in her before their death. "Just another backpacker," she murmured to herself, practicing the casual stance she'd observed in travelers at hostels during her research. Just Ellie. Not Elena Winterstone. The first fat raindrops began to fall as she made her way through the town's narrow streets. The weather forecast had mentioned a storm, but the rapidly darkening sky suggested something more severe. Wind whipped around her, carrying the scent of salt and ozone. She quickened her pace, looking for shelter as the rain intensified. Turning down what she thought was a shortcut, Ellie found herself in a narrow alley. The sound of footsteps behind her made her heart race. "Hey there, pretty lady," a male voice called. "Looks like you're lost." Ellie turned to see 3 men blocking her path back to the main street. Their postures and smirks sent alarm bells ringing through her mind. "I'm fine, thank you," she said firmly, gripping her backpack strap tighter and turning to walk in the opposite direction. "Come on, we just want to help," another said, moving to cut off her escape route. "Maybe you can help us too." The rain was coming down in sheets now, plastering her clothes to her skin. Lightning flashed, momentarily illuminating the predatory expressions on their faces. "Leave me alone," Ellie said, trying to keep her voice steady despite her racing pulse. One of them reached for her arm. "Don't be like that." The lady said to leave her alone. The deep voice cut through the rain as a broad-shouldered figure stepped into the alley. Even through the downpour, Ellie could make out the man's determined stance and the fierce protectiveness in his eyes. "Mind your business, Barrett," one of the men spat. "3 guys cornering a woman alone is my business," the man, Barrett, replied, his voice dangerously calm. "Now back off before I call Chief Martinez. I'm sure he'd love to add to your records." Something in his tone made the men hesitate. After a tense moment, they backed away, muttering threats as they disappeared into the storm. Barrett turned to Ellie, concern replacing the hardness in his expression. "Are you hurt?" "No, I'm—" A violent shiver cut off her words as the adrenaline began to fade, leaving her cold and trembling. "Let's get you somewhere dry," he said, gesturing toward the street. "I'm Logan Barrett, by the way." "Ellie," she replied, deliberately omitting her last name. "Thank you for helping me." They hurried through the storm to a small cafe with a weathered sign reading Shoreline Cafe. As Logan unlocked the door, Ellie noticed her backpack felt suspiciously light. "My bag," she gasped, unzipping it to find her wallet, phone, and most of her clothes gone. "They must have taken everything while I was distracted." Logan's expression darkened. "Those lowlifes." He ran a hand through his wet hair, clearly weighing options. "Look, I don't normally do this, but you can crash on my couch tonight. It's above the cafe, at least until you can contact your family." Ellie stared at him, touched by the offer, despite his obvious reluctance. Here was a man clearly struggling himself. She could see it in the worry lines around his eyes and the cafe's modest furnishings. Yet he was extending help to a stranger. "Thank you," she said softly. "I promise I won't be any trouble." Little did Logan know that the bedraggled tourist he'd just rescued was the heiress to the very corporation threatening his livelihood. Sunlight streamed through thin curtains, casting warm patterns across Ellie's face. She blinked awake, momentarily disoriented by the unfamiliar surroundings. The couch beneath her was worn but comfortable, nothing like the luxury mattresses she was accustomed to. As reality filtered back, she remembered the storm, the theft, and Logan's reluctant kindness. Quiet voices drifted from the kitchen. Ellie sat up slowly, careful not to make noise as she observed the scene unfolding before her. Logan stood at the stove, flipping pancakes with practiced ease, while a young girl, his daughter she presumed, sat at a small table arranging colorful seashells. "Dad, can we go tide pooling this weekend?" the girl asked, holding up a delicate spiral shell. "Ms. Rodriguez says our science projects are due in 3 weeks, and I want to document the sea anemones when the tide is super low." "We'll try, Aya," Logan replied, his voice softening in a way Ellie hadn't heard the previous night. "But the cafe's going to be busy with the weekend crowd." "You always say that," Aya sighed dramatically, but without real resentment. Logan placed a pancake shaped like a starfish on her plate. "Special order for my favorite marine biologist." The girl's face lit up with delight. "It's perfect." She carefully poured syrup into each of the star's points. Ellie felt a sudden tightness in her chest. This simple moment between father and daughter contained more genuine affection than she'd experienced in years of formal dinners at the Winterstone estate. Her own childhood had been filled with material abundance but emotional scarcity, especially after her parents' death, when her grandmother had taken over her upbringing with rigid expectations and calculated affection. Logan turned, noticing her awake. "Morning," he said, his tone reserved but not unkind. "There's coffee if you want some." "Thank you," Ellie replied, standing and smoothing down her borrowed t-shirt. Aya studied her with undisguised curiosity. "I'm Aya. Are you Dad's friend?" "I'm Ellie. Your dad helped me out last night when some not-so-nice people took my things." Logan set a mug of coffee on the counter. "Ellie's staying just until her money transfer comes through," he explained to his daughter, emphasizing the temporary nature of the arrangement. Ellie nodded, maintaining her cover story. "I've contacted my family, but they said the wire transfer might take a few days to process." Logan's shoulders tensed slightly. "A few days?" "I'd be happy to help around the cafe to earn my keep," Ellie offered quickly. "I've worked in food service before." It wasn't entirely a lie. She'd observed countless restaurant operations during her hotel management training. Logan seemed to weigh his options before nodding reluctantly. "I could use the help. We open in an hour." The morning rush at Shoreline Cafe surprised Ellie with its intensity. Logan moved with efficient precision behind the counter, preparing orders while she navigated the tables, taking orders and delivering food. "You're a natural," Logan commented during a brief lull, watching as she charmed a table of regulars who'd left a generous tip. "People are easy when you genuinely listen to them," Ellie replied, reaching for the same serving tray Logan was grabbing. Their hands touched briefly, and Ellie felt an unexpected jolt of awareness. Logan's eyes met hers, widening slightly before he quickly withdrew his hand. "Sorry," he mumbled, turning back to the grill with unusual focus. Ellie felt her cheeks warm as she carried plates to a waiting table, wondering if he'd felt that same spark. After the lunch rush, Aya returned from school, settling at a corner table with her science materials spread around her. Ellie approached during a quiet moment. "What are you working on?" she asked. Aya looked up with a frustrated expression. "My science project on marine conservation. I want to show how plastic pollution affects tide pool ecosystems, but I can't figure out how to make my display board stand out." "Mind if I take a look?" Ellie asked, sitting beside her. "You know about ocean conservation?" Aya asked hopefully. Ellie smiled. "It's something I care deeply about. In fact, the Winterstone Environmental Foundation, established by her parents, was one of the largest private funders of marine protection initiatives, though she couldn't share that detail. For the next hour, Ellie helped Aya organize her research, suggesting creative ways to present her findings. They were so engrossed that Ellie didn't notice Logan watching them from behind the counter. "The problem isn't just that plastic breaks down into microplastics," Ellie explained enthusiastically. "It's that these tiny particles then enter the food chain when they're consumed by small marine organisms. And then bigger animals eat those organisms, and the plastic moves up the food chain." Aya finished, her eyes bright with understanding. Logan approached with a plate of cookies. "Snack break," he announced, setting them down. His expression had softened, watching how animated his daughter had become. "Dad, Ellie knows everything about ocean conservation. She's helping me make my project amazing," Aya exclaimed. "Is that right?" Logan said, his eyes meeting Ellie's with newfound appreciation. "She's doing all the hard work," Ellie replied. "I'm just helping organize what she already knows." As Aya reached for a cookie, Logan's gaze lingered on Ellie. "Thank you," he said quietly. "It's nice to see her so excited about this." In that moment, something shifted between them, a tentative bridge forming across their different worlds. The coastal town of Seabreeze Cove revealed its charms over the next few days as Logan guided Ellie through its winding streets and hidden treasures. The morning air carried salt and promise as they strolled along the boardwalk, Aya skipping ahead to examine shells and sea glass. This place has been here since the 1920s, Logan explained, gesturing to a weathered ice cream parlor with a striped awning. Still uses the original recipes. Ellie smiled, savoring the simple joy of wandering without a schedule or expectations. It's beautiful how much history this town preserves. That's becoming rare these days. That's what I love about it, Logan admitted, his usual guardedness softening. Everything has a story here. Nothing's disposable. Their casual conversations flowed more easily now, revealing shared values despite their different backgrounds. Logan spoke of his dreams for expanding the cafe's menu with sustainable seafood options. Ellie shared stories from her travels, carefully edited to hide her wealth, but genuine in her observations of people and places. Dark clouds gathered unexpectedly as they reached the far end of the beach. The first heavy raindrops fell just as Logan pointed toward a wooden gazebo perched on a small bluff. "Run for it," he called, grabbing Ellie's hand instinctively. They raced across the sand, laughing as they reached the shelter just as the downpour intensified. Water dripped from Ellie's hair as she caught her breath, acutely aware that Logan still held her hand. He seemed to realize it simultaneously, releasing it with an apologetic smile. "Some tour guide I am," he said, running a hand through his damp hair. "Should have checked the weather." "I don't mind," Ellie replied truthfully. "Sometimes the unexpected moments are the best ones." The rain drummed against the gazebo roof as they settled on the bench, watching sheets of water blur the horizon where sea met sky. Something about the isolation and the rhythm of the storm created an intimacy that invited confidence. "I used to bring my wife here," Logan said quietly, his eyes on the distant waves. "Marina loved storms, said they reminded her that nature was always bigger than our problems." Ellie remained silent, sensing the significance of him sharing this. "After she got sick, we'd still come when she had good days. Watch the storms roll in." His voice grew softer. "When she died, Aya was only 5. I was executive sous chef at a resort in the city then. The hours were impossible for a single dad." "So you opened Shoreline Cafe," Ellie finished gently. Logan nodded. "Scaled everything back. Simpler menu, shorter hours. Less money, but more time with Aya. Marina would have wanted that." "She'd be proud of you," Ellie said, feeling the weight of his resilience. Not everyone would choose their child over their career so completely. The truth of her own story rose to her lips. How her parents had prioritized her over the Winterstone Empire until their deaths. How her grandmother had reversed those priorities entirely. But she swallowed the words, suddenly afraid of breaking this fragile connection with the reality of who she was. The rain eased as they walked back, a comfortable silence between them until they reached the cafe. The peaceful moment shattered as they approached the entrance, where a sleek black luxury car was parked. Inside, a man in an impeccable suit leaned against the counter, examining the space with cold calculation. His presence seemed to drain the warmth from the room. "Barrett," the man said, straightening as they entered. "Perfect timing." Logan's posture stiffened. "Hargrove, what do you want?" Vincent Hargrove smiled without warmth. "Just delivering some paperwork personally." He slid an envelope across the counter. "Notice of foreclosure proceedings. You've missed 3 mortgage payments." "I just need more time," Logan said, his voice tight. "Summer season's starting." "Time's up," Hargrove interrupted. "But don't worry too much. This whole strip is coming down anyway for the Ocean View luxury condominiums. The bank's already approved the development plan." Ellie felt her stomach drop. Luxury condominiums were exactly what she'd been sent to scout locations for. But not like this, not by destroying existing businesses. "You can't demolish the entire boardwalk," Logan protested. "These are people's livelihoods." "Progress waits for no one," Hargrove replied dismissively, walking toward the door. He paused beside Ellie, assessing her with a curious glance before continuing outside. When the door closed, Logan sank onto a stool, the envelope clutched in his hand. I'm going to lose everything, he whispered, vulnerability etched across his features. That evening, the small kitchen became their sanctuary as they prepared dinner together. Ellie chopped vegetables while Logan stirred sauce, their movements creating an intimate dance in the confined space. Their arms brushed occasionally, each contact sending warmth through Ellie's skin. There might be ways to fight this, she offered, sliding closer to add herbs to his sauce. From my previous job experience, I know these developers often count on small business owners not knowing their rights. Logan looked at her with surprise. What kind of experience? I worked in hospitality management, she said carefully. Saw a lot of development projects. Sometimes community organizing can delay them long enough to find alternative solutions. Logan's shoulders relaxed slightly as hope flickered in his eyes. You really think there's a chance? Ellie turned fully toward him, their faces inches apart in the narrow kitchen. I do, she said softly. You've built something worth fighting for. His gaze held hers, the vulnerability in his expression now mixed with something else, a connection neither had expected to find. The next morning, Logan paced the cafe kitchen, turning Hargrove's threat over in his mind. He paused when Ellie entered, her hair still damp from the shower. I've been thinking about what you said, he admitted, about fighting back. Ellie nodded encouragingly. The first step is making this place too successful to ignore. Logan ran a hand through his hair. I'm barely keeping the lights on. How exactly do we do that? Let me help, she said, then added quickly when she saw his expression. Just some suggestions. It's still your cafe. After a long moment, Logan exhaled. Fine. What would you change? Over the next few days, Ellie's suggestions began subtly transforming Shoreline Cafe. She rearranged the seating to create a more inviting flow and better ocean views. She convinced Logan to update the menu, highlighting local ingredients and his most popular dishes while streamlining the less profitable ones. People don't just come for food, she explained while setting up a simple social media account. They come for experience. We need to show them what makes this place special. Logan watched skeptically as she photographed his freshly plated seafood pasta against the backdrop of the ocean view. Social media seems like a waste of time. Trust me, Ellie said, typing a caption. This is how people decide where to eat these days. By the weekend, the changes were showing results. The lunch rush extended longer than usual, and several customers mentioned finding them online. When a group of tourists came in specifically asking for that amazing seafood pasta they saw on Instagram, Logan's skepticism began to fade. Not bad, he conceded that evening as they counted the day's receipts, which were notably higher than usual. Where did you learn all this? Ellie kept her eyes on the cash she was sorting. I told you, hospitality management. Must have been someplace, Logan remarked. You handle this stuff like you were born to it. The irony made her smile. Just observant, I guess. Later that week, they took advantage of the clear evening to bring Aya to the beach. The 10-year-old ran ahead with a jar to collect shells, while Logan spread a blanket on the sand. Look, Aya called as darkness fell. The stars are coming out. They lay back on the blanket, pointing out constellations. Aya nestled between them, her excitement gradually yielding to drowsiness as Logan quietly told stories about sailors navigating by stars. That one's my favorite, Ellie whispered, pointing to a bright star near the horizon. When I was little, my father told me it was where wishes went when they came true. Logan glanced at her, surprised by the personal revelation. What did you wish for? Freedom, she said softly. To choose my own path. Aya's breathing had deepened into sleep, her small body curled trustingly against Ellie's side. The comfortable silence between the adults evolved as they gazed upward, their shoulders nearly touching. What about you? Ellie asked. What did you want before everything changed? Logan was quiet so long she thought he might not answer. "I wanted to create," he finally said. "Not just cook, but really create. I had this idea for a restaurant that would change its menu completely with the seasons, using only what could be sourced within 50 miles. "That sounds amazing," Ellie said. "Why didn't you pursue it?" "Life," he shrugged. "Bills, responsibility." He looked down at his sleeping daughter. No regrets, though. The next day, Ellie found Logan experimenting in the kitchen before opening. "What if," she suggested, watching him work, "we created a signature dish? Something that represents everything special about this place." His eyes lit up with an enthusiasm she hadn't seen before. They spent the morning collaborating, Logan's culinary expertise blending with Ellie's instinct for what would appeal to customers. They created a dish featuring locally caught fish with a sauce that incorporated herbs grown in the small garden behind the cafe. "It needs something," Logan frowned, tasting their creation. Ellie reached past him for a lemon, her arm brushing his. The brief contact sent warmth through both of them. "Try this," she suggested, her voice slightly unsteady. Their shoreline special became an instant hit when added to the menu. Customers began coming specifically to try it, and several posted photos online, expanding their growing social media presence. "We make a good team," Logan admitted one evening as they closed up after another successful day. He moved beside her to help wipe down the counter, their hands accidentally meeting over the cloth. Neither pulled away immediately. Ellie looked up to find Logan studying her face with an intensity that made her breath catch. For a moment, the space between them seemed charged with possibility. "I guess we do," she replied softly, aware of how dangerously easy it would be to lean toward him, to close the distance that was becoming increasingly difficult to maintain. The weekend brought perfect tide pool conditions, and Aya could barely contain her excitement as she packed her collection kit. Small jars, a notebook, and a digital thermometer Logan had splurged on for her science project. "Can Ellie come with us?" Aya asked, bouncing on her toes. Logan glanced at Ellie, who was arranging fresh flowers on the cafe tables. "I'm sure she has other things." "I'd love to," Ellie interrupted, smiling. "If that's okay with you?" He couldn't find a reason to object, especially with Aya's pleading eyes. Sure, someone should keep an eye on this wild scientist. The rocky outcropping at the far end of the beach was Aya's favorite spot. As they navigated the slippery rocks, Logan watched Ellie carefully follow his daughter, matching her enthusiasm for each tiny discovery. "I need to check on something at the cafe," Logan said after they'd settled into their exploration. "You two okay for half an hour?" Ellie looked up surprised. "We'll be fine, right, marine biologist?" Aya nodded seriously. "I'll take care of her, Dad." After Logan left, Ellie and Aya crouched beside a particularly vibrant pool. "Look at this," Aya exclaimed, pointing to a purple sea star. "It's a Pisaster ochraceus, their keystone species." "Impressive," Ellie said. "How do you know so much about this?" Aya's expression softened. "Mom used to bring me here. She taught me all the names." She carefully measured the water temperature, recording it in her notebook. "Did you know the ocean absorbs most of the extra heat from climate change?" "I did," Ellie said. "My family's foundation actually funds research on marine conservation." "Really?" Aya's eyes widened. "That's what I want to do when I grow up." Ellie helped Aya collect water samples, explaining how small changes in temperature affected entire ecosystems. When a tiny hermit crab scuttled across Aya's palm, both of them dissolved into laughter. "Can I take our picture?" Aya asked, pulling out her phone. "For my project documentation." They posed together, cheeks pressed close, the tide pool in the foreground. Aya immediately checked the result, then tapped her screen several times. "What are you doing?" Ellie asked. "Making it my background," Aya replied matter-of-factly, "so I can remember today." When Logan returned, he found them huddled over Aya's notebook, deep in conversation about conservation efforts. Something in his chest tightened at the sight. Back at the cafe, Logan was surprised to find Marta from the souvenir shop waiting. "Everyone's talking about your turnaround," she said. "I was wondering if your consultant might have a few minutes for me." Logan raised an eyebrow at Ellie, who looked momentarily panicked before composing herself. "I'm not really—" "She's being modest," Logan interrupted. "She's transformed this place." Over the next few days, more shopkeepers sought Ellie's advice. She helped the bookstore owner rearrange displays and suggested the ice cream parlor create a signature flavor inspired by local ingredients. Each success seemed to both please and unsettle her. "You're becoming the boardwalk's guardian angel," Logan teased one evening. "I'm just applying basic principles," she demurred. "Anyone could do it." "Not anyone," he said. "You see things differently." The following Friday, Logan hosted an impromptu gathering of boardwalk business owners. The cafe buzzed with conversation as people shared ideas for attracting more visitors. "Everyone," Logan called out, tapping a glass for attention. "I want to thank my business consultant, Ellie, for bringing new life to our little corner of the coast." All eyes turned to her, and for a moment, Ellie looked like she might flee. Instead, she smiled and raised her glass. "To community," she said, "the real treasure of this place." Later, after everyone had gone and Aya was asleep upstairs, Logan and Ellie moved through the quiet cafe, putting chairs on tables. The radio played softly in the background when a slow song came on. "I love this one," Ellie said, pausing her work. Logan hesitated, then extended his hand. "Dance with me?" Her surprise gave way to a smile as she placed her hand in his. They moved awkwardly at first, then found their rhythm, swaying in the dim light between tables. "Thank you," Logan said softly. "For what?" "For seeing the potential here, in the cafe, in the community." He paused. "In me." The space between them disappeared slowly as they moved closer. Logan's hand gently touched her cheek, and Ellie's eyes fluttered closed as their faces drew nearer. A sharp buzzing sound broke the moment. Ellie jumped back, fumbling for her phone. The screen displayed "Grandmother" with a photo of an elegant, severe-looking woman. Ellie quickly silenced it, her expression transforming from warmth to anxiety in an instant. "Everything okay?" Logan asked. "Fine," she said too quickly. "Just someone I need to call back later." Logan studied her face, noting how completely the carefree woman of moments ago had vanished. "Ellie, who are you really?" The following days saw Logan and Ellie working side by side in a rhythm that felt surprisingly natural. They moved around each other in the small kitchen with an unspoken choreography, anticipating each other's needs before they were voiced. Logan found himself smiling more, laughing at Ellie's observations about regular customers and marveling at how she remembered everyone's preferences. "Mrs. Henderson always wants her coffee with exactly 1 ice cube," Ellie said, preparing the order. "And Mr. Daniels pretends to read the newspaper, but he's actually doing the crossword." Logan shook his head. "I've served them for years and never noticed." "You see the big picture. I notice details," she replied, her fingers brushing his as she took a plate from his hands. Meanwhile, Ellie's phone buzzed with increasing frequency. Each time her grandmother's name appeared, she silenced it with a grimace. The voicemails grew more demanding. "Elena, the board meeting is in 2 weeks, and Vincent Hargrove is growing impatient about our partnership." One evening, she listened to the latest message while Logan was busy in the kitchen. "Your absence is jeopardizing everything your parents built. If you're not back by Friday, I'll send someone to find you." Ellie's hands trembled as she deleted it. She was running out of time, but the thought of leaving filled her with unexpected dread. The annual Sunset Beach Festival arrived on a perfect summer day. Colorful tents lined the boardwalk. Local artists displayed their work, and the air smelled of funnel cakes and saltwater taffy. "We're closing early," Logan announced, flipping the sign on the cafe door. Some things are more important than business. Aya bounced with excitement. Can Ellie come with us? I was counting on it, Logan said, his eyes meeting Ellie's. They spent the day in carefree abandon. Aya dragged them from booth to booth, her face painted with a blue seahorse design that matched her science fair project. Logan won a stuffed octopus at the ring toss and presented it to Ellie with exaggerated formality. They ate ice cream cones that dripped down their fingers in the warm sun, and Ellie couldn't remember the last time she'd laughed so freely. As evening approached, they claimed a spot on the beach for the fireworks display. Aya spread out their blanket with scientific precision, declaring it the optimal viewing location. When the sky darkened, Aya nestled between them, her head eventually drooping against Logan's shoulder as she dozed off. The first fireworks burst overhead in a shower of gold and blue. "This is perfect," Ellie whispered, watching the colors reflect in Logan's eyes. "It is now," he replied, gently shifting Aya so he could move closer to Ellie. The next explosion illuminated her face, and Logan reached out to tuck a strand of hair behind her ear. His touch lingered on her cheek. "Ellie," he said softly, "I haven't felt this way in a very long time." Their lips met as red and green fireworks bloomed above them. The kiss was gentle at first, then deepened with a longing that took them both by surprise. When they finally pulled apart, they were breathless. "Wow," Ellie whispered. "Yeah," Logan agreed, his forehead resting against hers. Later that night, after they'd carried a sleeping Aya home, they sat on the small balcony outside Logan's apartment. The festival lights still twinkled along the boardwalk below. "Logan, there's something I need to tell you," Ellie began, her heart pounding. "I'm not exactly who you think." His phone rang, interrupting her confession. Logan frowned at the screen. "It's late for a call." The conversation was brief, but his expression brightened. "That was Richard Thompson. He wants to meet tomorrow, says he's interested in investing in the cafe." "That's sudden," Ellie said cautiously. "He mentioned expansion possibilities, maybe even a second location." Logan's eyes shone with excitement. This could solve everything. "Did he mention who referred him?" Ellie asked, her business instincts prickling. When Logan described the terms Thompson had outlined, Ellie recognized the predatory tactics immediately. "Logan, this isn't an investment, it's a takeover. These terms would give him controlling interest within a year." She explained the hidden pitfalls in the proposal, drawing on knowledge she couldn't easily explain away. Logan listened, his expression shifting from disappointment to admiration. "How do you know all this?" Before she could answer, Aya appeared in the doorway, rubbing her eyes. "Is the festival over?" "Yes, sweetie," Logan said. "Time for bed." Aya looked at Ellie with sleepy directness. "Will you stay with us forever, Ellie? Dad smiles more when you're here." The innocent question struck Ellie like a physical blow. She glanced at Logan, who looked equally stunned, then back at Aya's hopeful face. "I dot." Ellie's voice caught as the weight of her deception pressed against the truth of her feelings. She was falling in love with them both, even as her two worlds were rushing toward an inevitable collision. The next morning, the boardwalk buzzed with tension. Shop owners clustered in worried groups outside their businesses, their faces drawn with concern. Logan spotted Mrs. Chen from the souvenir shop waving frantically to him. "Logan! Emergency meeting at the community center in 30 minutes, she called. "Hargrove's making his move." Inside the packed community center, Vincent Hargrove stood at the front, impeccably dressed and radiating smug confidence. His smooth voice carried through the room. "Change is inevitable," he announced, gesturing to architectural renderings displayed on easels. "My company is merely the vehicle. I'm pleased to announce we've secured backing from Winterstone Developments, one of the largest luxury property corporations in the country." Ellie froze at the name, blood draining from her face. She gripped the edge of her chair as Hargrove continued. The Winterstone Group recognizes the potential of this charming location. Construction begins in 3 weeks. Logan leaned forward, his jaw tight. This community has rights. We won't be bulldozed for your profit. Hargrove's smile never reached his eyes. Your leases are expiring, Mr. Barrett. It's simply business. After the meeting, Ellie slipped away, finding a quiet spot behind the community center. With shaking hands, she dialed a number she rarely used. Margaret? It's me. I need information on grandmother's new coastal development project. The confirmation hit her like a physical blow. Winterstone Developments, her family's company, her inheritance, was financing the very project that would destroy Logan's life and the community she'd grown to love. That evening, while Logan organized resistance efforts with other business owners, Ellie made another call from the cafe's storage room. Grandmother, please reconsider this partnership with Hargrove. The environmental impact alone. Elena, her grandmother's voice cut like steel. This is precisely why you should be here, not gallivanting in some beach town. The Hargrove deal is lucrative and perfectly aligned with our expansion goals. It's destroying a community, Ellie argued. It's business. And speaking of which, I'm arriving Friday for the groundbreaking ceremony. I expect you there, properly dressed and prepared to represent the family. The line went dead. Ellie pressed her forehead against the cool wall, trapped between worlds. Later that night, she helped Logan prepare flyers for a community protest. His determination both inspired and devastated her. We're not giving up without a fight, he said, the kitchen table covered with papers. These corporations think small towns will just roll over. Aya had fallen asleep on the couch, her science project materials spread around her. Logan gently covered her with a blanket. You know, he said softly, sitting beside Ellie. I've had this dream since Kate died, that Aya would grow up in this town, knowing every tide pool and beach path, that she'd have the cafe someday, if she wanted it. He took Ellie's hand. Lately, I've been thinking about expanding that dream, to include someone else. His eyes held a question, a future. Ellie's throat tightened with unshed tears. Logan, she began. His phone buzzed. It's the Community Coalition, he said, answering it. While he talked, Ellie's phone lit up with a message from her assistant. Confirmed. Mrs. Winterstone arriving Friday for groundbreaking ceremony. Car and security arranged. Ellie stared at the message, the walls of her double life closing in. The morning after their late-night planning session, Aya sat at her desk, determination etched across her young face. Her science notebook lay open, filled with observations about the tide pools near Hargrove's construction site. Last week she'd noticed something disturbing. Oily residue in the water and dead marine life washing up near the development area. If I can prove they're hurting the ocean, Dad and the grown-ups can stop them, she whispered to herself, tucking her notebook into her backpack. Dark clouds gathered on the horizon as Aya slipped out of the cafe during the lunch rush. She knew her father would never let her go to the construction site alone, especially with a storm approaching. But this was too important to wait. Meanwhile, Logan and Ellie worked side by side in the busy cafe, their movements synchronized after weeks together. Where's Aya? Logan asked, scanning the dining room. She usually helps with the lunch napkins. I thought she was working on her science project upstairs, Ellie replied, a flutter of concern in her chest. When they checked the apartment and found it empty, Logan's face paled. Her backpack's gone. Her notebook, Ellie said suddenly. She's been documenting something at the tide pools near the construction site. She showed me yesterday. Lightning flashed outside as realization dawned on Logan's face. The pier, she wouldn't, but he knew she would. Aya was nothing if not determined, just like her mother. The storm intensified as they raced toward the pier, rain pelting their faces. Wind whipped around them, carrying the scent of ozone and danger. Aya! Logan shouted over the howling wind. They spotted her small figure at the far end of the pier, kneeling by the edge, collecting water samples in small vials. The ancient wooden structure groaned beneath her, sections already beginning to splinter under the assault of massive waves. "Dad!" Aya's voice barely carried over the storm as she stood, suddenly aware of her precarious position. A massive wave crashed against the pilings, and the section beneath her feet shifted ominously. "Don't move!" Logan shouted, his heart hammering as he started across the deteriorating structure. "Logan, it won't hold both of you!" Ellie cried. But she was already following him, calculating the safest path across the damaged boards. A sickening crack echoed through the air as a section between them and Aya gave way. Aya screamed, clinging to a railing as the platform beneath her tilted toward the churning water. Without hesitation, Ellie leapt across the gap, her feet landing on creaking boards. She scrambled toward Aya, reaching her just as another section began to collapse. "Jump to me, sweetheart," she called, extending her arms. Aya launched herself forward as the platform beneath her disintegrated. Ellie caught her, spinning to shield the child with her body as debris rained down. A heavy wooden beam struck Ellie's shoulder and back, driving her to her knees. Logan reached them seconds later, gathering them both in his arms as they navigated back across the disintegrating pier. "I've got you," he repeated, his voice breaking. "I've got both of you." At the hospital, Ellie sat on an examination table, her shoulder bandaged as Aya clung to her uninjured side. "You could have been killed," Logan said, his voice raw with emotion. "Both of you." He knelt before them, taking Ellie's hand. "You risked your life for my daughter." "Our daughter," Ellie whispered without thinking, then flushed. She's precious to me too." Logan's eyes filled with tears. "Your family now. Both of you." He leaned forward, pressing his forehead against hers. "I love you, Ellie." The moment shattered as the hospital room door burst open. A regal elderly woman entered, flanked by security personnel and followed by camera flashes. "Elena Winterstone, thank goodness you're all right," the woman announced. "When they said my granddaughter was injured at that dreadful construction site..." Logan froze, his hand still clasping Ellie's as realization dawned across his face. "Winterstone?" he whispered, pulling away. "As in Winterstone Developments?" Ellie's grandmother surveyed the scene with cold eyes. "Of course, Elena is the sole heir to the Winterstone Empire." She turned to a hovering assistant. "Make sure the photographers get good angles. Heiress injured inspecting development site will make excellent press." Logan stood slowly, betrayal etched across his features as he stared at the woman he thought he knew. "You're one of them," he said, his voice hollow. "This whole time." Logan stood in the hospital corridor, his hands trembling as Ellie's grandmother and her entourage finally departed. The antiseptic smell turned his stomach as the truth crashed over him in relentless waves. "Logan, please," Ellie begged, her voice breaking. "I didn't know about the development until after I met you. I've been trying to stop it." "Stop." The word came out like shattered glass. Every moment between us was a lie. Tears streamed down Ellie's face. "That's not true. What we have is real." "What we had," Logan corrected, his jaw tight. "The woman I fell in love with doesn't exist. You're Elena Winterstone, heiress to the corporation that's destroying my home, my business, my daughter's future." "Dad?" Aya's small voice interrupted from the doorway, her arm in a sling. "Why are you yelling at Ellie?" Logan softened his tone, but not his resolve. "Go wait in the car, sweetheart. We're leaving." But Ellie's hurt. Now, Aya. After Aya reluctantly left, Ellie reached for Logan's hand. He flinched away as if burned. "Was this fun for you?" he asked, voice hollow. "Slumming with the locals before your corporation bulldozes our homes. Getting an up-close look at the little people you're destroying." "That's not fair," Ellie whispered. "I love you. I love Aya." "You lied to us from the moment we met. That's not love." Logan backed toward the door. "Stay away from my daughter. She's been through enough loss without you using her for your entertainment." The walk to the car was the longest of Logan's life, each step carrying him farther from the woman he'd thought was his future. 3 days later, Ellie sat in the penthouse suite of the Winterstone Grand Hotel, staring out at the coastline where, somewhere, Logan and Aya were going about their lives without her. "Elena, are you listening?" Her grandmother's sharp voice cut through her thoughts. "Vincent Hargrove and his investors are expecting us for dinner. The Peterson boy will be there. Harvard Business School, family and shipping. Perfect match for securing our Pacific routes." "I'm not interested in being auctioned off, grandmother," Ellie replied flatly. "This childish vacation of yours is over," her grandmother snapped. "You have responsibilities to this family." Later that evening, surrounded by business associates discussing profit margins, Ellie felt hollowed out. The crystal glasses and silver platters that had once been her normal now seemed gaudy and meaningless without Logan's honest smile and Aya's curious questions. "Dad, when is Ellie coming back?" Aya asked, pushing her untouched dinner around her plate. Logan sighed, setting down his fork. The cafe was empty again tonight. Without Ellie's innovations, customers had dwindled back to a trickle. "She's not, sweetheart. She has her own life, a very different life from ours." "But she loves us," Aya insisted. "She saved me. She got hurt protecting me." Logan couldn't answer. The memory of Ellie throwing herself between his daughter and danger tormented him. If it had all been an act, why risk her life? "She was crying when we left her at the hospital," Aya continued, her young face troubled. "You didn't even say goodbye." The truth of his daughter's words stung worse than any physical pain. Logan had been too hurt, too angry to see beyond his own betrayal. "Sometimes adults make mistakes," he finally said, unsure if he was referring to Ellie's deception or his own harsh rejection. The cafe's empty tables reflected in the darkened windows, a visual echo of the emptiness in his heart. The groundbreaking ceremony site buzzed with activity as workers erected a white tent adorned with the Winterstone logo. A golden shovel gleamed on a velvet cushion near the podium, and champagne glasses waited to be filled. Reporters jostled for position, while local officials mingled with corporate executives. Ellie sat rigid in the front row, her grandmother beside her like a sentinel. She wore the corporate uniform her grandmother had selected, a tailored navy suit that felt like armor, constraining and foreign after weeks in casual clothes at Logan's cafe. "Remember your talking points," her grandmother whispered. "Emphasize job creation and economic revitalization. The environmental concerns are exaggerated. Stick to the script." Ellie nodded mechanically, but her eyes drifted to the small group of protesters gathered beyond the security barriers. Several faces she recognized from the boardwalk businesses, the bookstore owner, the ice cream shop couple. Their handmade signs declared, "Save our shore," and "Community not condos." Vincent Hargrove approached the podium, his practiced smile never reaching his eyes. "Today marks the beginning of a new era for this charming but outdated coastal town," he announced. "With the Winterstone Corporation's investment, we'll transform this area into a world-class destination." Cameras flashed as Ellie's grandmother nudged her toward the stage. "Your turn, dear. Make the family proud." Walking to the podium felt like moving through water. The microphone loomed before her, and suddenly Ellie saw Logan's face the night Hargrove had threatened the cafe, the quiet dignity in his fear, his determination to protect what mattered. She looked down at her prepared remarks, then out at the crowd. A small figure caught her eye. Aya, hiding behind a tree at the perimeter, phone held up to record. Their eyes met briefly before Ellie turned to the microphone. "My name is Elena Winterstone," she began, her voice steadier than she felt. and I cannot support this development." A collective gasp rippled through the audience. Her grandmother half rose from her seat, eyes flashing with warning. The current plan would destroy a vibrant community and cause irreparable environmental damage to delicate coastal ecosystems, Ellie continued. "As of today, I am announcing my intention to use my personal inheritance to create an alternative development plan, one that preserves existing businesses and prioritizes environmental sustainability." Her grandmother was at the edge of the stage now, signaling frantically for someone to cut the microphone. "This community deserves better than luxury condominiums that only the wealthy can afford," Ellie said, speaking faster. "They deserve investment that honors their history and protects their future." Her grandmother reached the podium, voice low but venomous. "Stop this immediately or you are cut off. Everything, your trust fund, your position, your inheritance, all of it, gone." Ellie met her grandmother's gaze, feeling a strange calm settle over her. "Then it's gone," she said, both to her grandmother and into the microphone. "I hereby resign from the Winterstone Corporation, effective immediately." Chaos erupted as reporters shouted questions and camera flashes blinded her. Through the confusion, Ellie caught a glimpse of Aya's triumphant smile as the girl dashed away, phone clutched tightly in her hand. Later, Logan sat at the kitchen table, staring at his laptop screen, as another news article detailed Ellie's dramatic stand against her family's empire. His coffee had gone cold hours ago, forgotten as he absorbed every detail of what she'd sacrificed. "Heiress Alina Winterstone disinherited after public stance against family project," the headline blared. The article explained how she'd been immediately cut off from her trust fund, removed from company letterhead, and reportedly disowned by her grandmother. "She gave up everything," he murmured, running a hand through his disheveled hair. Aya appeared beside him, still in her pajamas. "I told you she was good, Dad." She pointed at the screen. "Look, they're saying she's staying at the Seaside Motel now. That's like the cheapest place in town." Logan's chest tightened. The Seaside was barely a step above a hostel, nothing like what Ellie was accustomed to. Yet she'd chosen to stay in town rather than retreat to some other luxury property. "She didn't tell us because she wanted us to like her for her," Aya said with the simple clarity of a child. "Not because she was rich." The truth of his daughter's words hit Logan like a physical blow. He'd accused Ellie of slumming, of playing games with their lives, when all she'd wanted was what everyone wants, to be loved for who she truly was. He grabbed his phone and started making calls. 3 days later, Ellie stood behind a hastily arranged podium in the Seaside Motel's small conference room. A handful of local reporters and 2 national news crews pointed cameras at her as she smoothed down her simple blouse, one of the few items she'd packed in her backpack weeks ago. "Thank you for coming," she began, her voice steady despite her nerves. "I want to formally announce my complete resignation from all Winterstone Enterprises and clarify my position on the coastal development project." As she shuffled her notes, the door at the back of the room swung open. Ellie looked up, her prepared statement forgotten as Logan walked in, followed by Aya and a stream of familiar faces: the bookstore owner, the ice cream shop couple, the elderly man who ran the bait shop, and at least a dozen other boardwalk business owners. Logan moved purposefully down the center aisle, his eyes never leaving hers. The cameras swiveled to follow him, but he didn't seem to notice. "Excuse me," he said, stepping up beside her at the podium. "I need to interrupt this press conference for something important." Ellie's heart hammered against her ribs. "Logan, what are you—" "I was wrong," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "I accused you of lying when you were just trying to find something real in a world that had never given you that chance." The reporters began murmuring and snapping photos as Aya beamed from the front row. "You sacrificed everything for this town, for principles that matter," Logan continued, taking her hand. "And I was too stubborn to see that the woman who helped in my kitchen, who taught my daughter about tide pools, who danced with me after closing. That was the real you all along." Tears welled in Ellie's eyes as Logan pulled a folder from under his arm and opened it on the podium. "This is a business plan," he explained, turning to include both Ellie and the cameras. "Created by every business owner on the boardwalk. We're proposing a community-owned development corporation with environmentally sustainable practices at its core." He looked back at Ellie. "And we want you to lead it." "But I don't have resources anymore," she whispered. "My grandmother." "We don't need your money," he said softly. "We need you, your vision, your heart, your expertise." He took both her hands in his. "I love you, Ellie. Not Elena Winterstone, heiress, just Ellie, the woman who fits perfectly into our lives." Cameras flashed frantically as Logan pulled her into his arms. Their lips met in a kiss that said everything words couldn't: forgiveness, acceptance, promise. When they finally parted, Ellie saw her grandmother standing at the back of the room, face tight with disapproval. But for the first time in her life, her grandmother's opinion didn't matter. "I love you too," Ellie said, loud enough for the microphones to catch. "And I accept your proposal, both of them." The room erupted in applause as Aya rushed forward to join their embrace, completing the family that had found each other against all odds. 6 months later, the coastal town had transformed. Where once stood weathered shops and struggling businesses, the renovated boardwalk now gleamed in the afternoon sun, its wooden planks restored with sustainable materials that complemented the natural beauty of the shoreline. At the heart of it all stood Barrett's, no longer just a cafe but the centerpiece of the town's new sustainable tourism center. The once cramped space had expanded to include an open-air deck overlooking the ocean, while inside, framed photographs of marine life taken by Aya lined the walls alongside informational displays about ocean conservation. Logan moved through the busy dining room, greeting customers with easy familiarity. The financial strain that had once lined his face had disappeared, replaced by the confidence of a man who had found his footing both professionally and personally. "Dad!" Aya called from the doorway, her science project display board tucked under one arm. "Ms. Rodriguez says we need to set up now for the ribbon cutting." "Be right there, sweetheart," Logan replied, handing a serving tray to one of his new employees, a local college student studying marine biology, one of several that the revitalized boardwalk now employed. Outside, a crowd had gathered for the grand opening celebration. Local business owners chatted excitedly with tourists and environmental activists who had come to witness the innovative development. Instead of the concrete monstrosity Hargrove had planned, the boardwalk now featured the original businesses alongside new attractions, all built with sustainable materials and powered by solar panels that blended seamlessly with the architecture. Logan spotted Ellie near the podium, dressed in a simple sundress rather than corporate attire, her hair loose around her shoulders. She was deep in conversation with the mayor and a representative from a national environmental organization interested in replicating their model in other coastal communities. As Logan approached, Ellie's face lit up. "There you are," she said, reaching for his hand. "Ready for the big moment?" "As ready as I'll ever be," he replied, still amazed at how naturally their professional and personal lives had intertwined. The mayor tapped the microphone, calling the crowd to attention. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the grand opening of our revitalized boardwalk and coastal conservation center." Applause rippled through the gathering as Ellie stepped forward to speak. Logan watched her with pride as she outlined the principles behind their development, how they'd preserved local businesses while incorporating educational elements about marine conservation, how they'd created jobs without sacrificing the town's character, and how they'd proven that economic growth didn't have to come at the expense of the environment. "This project represents the best of both worlds," Ellie concluded, "business acumen and community values working together rather than against each other." As she stepped back from the podium, Logan noticed a familiar figure at the edge of the crowd. Ellie's grandmother, Eleanor Winterstone, stood watching with an appraising eye. The elderly woman had arrived unannounced, her first appearance since disowning Ellie 6 months earlier. After the ribbon-cutting ceremony and Aya's proud presentation of her now award-winning science project on marine conservation, Logan saw Ellie approach her grandmother cautiously. "I'm impressed," he overheard the older woman say, her posture still rigid, but her tone softer than he remembered. "The quarterly projections for this project exceed what our original development would have generated." "It's not just about the numbers, grandmother," Ellie replied gently. "No," Eleanor conceded, glancing at Logan and Aya. "I can see that now." She handed Ellie a business card. "Call my office next week. Perhaps there's room for collaboration in the future." It wasn't a full reconciliation, but it was a beginning. Logan squeezed Ellie's hand as her grandmother departed, understanding what this tentative olive branch meant to her. As evening fell and the celebration continued with music and dancing on the boardwalk, Logan led Ellie away from the crowds, down to the quiet stretch of beach where they'd shared their first kiss under fireworks months ago. "I have something to show you," he said, guiding her toward the water's edge where the sunset painted the waves in shades of gold and pink. "What is it?" Ellie asked, her eyes curious. Logan dropped to one knee in the sand, pulling a small box from his pocket. Inside gleamed a simple but elegant ring with a sea blue stone. "Ellie," he began, his voice steady despite his racing heart. "You came into our lives disguised as someone with nothing, but you gave us everything. You showed me that people aren't defined by their circumstances but by their choices." He took a deep breath. "Will you choose to be my wife, to build this family with Aya and me for the rest of our lives?" Tears shimmered in Ellie's eyes. "Yes," she whispered. 1,000 times. "Yes." As Logan slipped the ring onto her finger and rose to kiss her, a delighted squeal interrupted them. Aya came running across the sand, her science project medal bouncing against her chest. "Did you ask her? Did she say yes?" she demanded, barely containing her excitement. Logan laughed. "She said yes." Aya threw her arms around both of them. "I knew it. Now we'll be a real family." "We already are," Ellie said softly, pulling Aya close. As twilight deepened around them, the three walked along the shoreline together, Logan with his arm around Ellie's waist, Aya skipping ahead to collect shells, occasionally running back to show her treasures. Their footprints marked the wet sand behind them. 3 paths merged into one, stretching toward the horizon where the first stars had begun to appear. If you enjoyed this story, I've found another special one just for you. Our community can't stop talking about how heartwarming and moving it is. Click on the video in front of you to experience this beautiful story before it's gone.